This is a copy of the Bible study from Thursday, the 25th of July, and it's based on the book of Job, and it's on the subject of how to be a bad listener. God's Word, the Bible, sets a significant amount of time and space aside for human beings to pour out all sorts of emotions. The book of Job is one example of this. Within the book of Job, we hear Job expressing all sorts of feelings, including anguish and sorrow, anger and frustration, fear and anxiety, feeling overwhelmed. Yet within the 34 chapters in which Job's feelings are expressed, Job devotes an equal amount of time to expressing his frustration at the failure of his friends to listen. The failure of his friends to truly listen, caused Job just as much upset as his external situation. So today we're going to learn about through Job's friends, we're going to learn how to be a bad listener. How to be a bad listener. Why? Well, if you know a way into a city, you also know the way out of the city. You simply head in the opposite direction. And if we know how to be a bad listener, then we can learn how to do the opposite and be a good listener as well. So firstly, how to be a bad listener. Be impatient. Be impatient. The first thing we learn about Job's friends in chapter 2 is that they were not impatient people. When they saw Job sat silent and upset, they sat on the ground with him for 7 days. Job's friends were not impatient people until Job opened his mouth. As soon as Job opened his mouth, 1 minute afterwards, they said this, "But who can keep from speaking?" As soon as Job opened his mouth, they weren't keen to listen. They were keen to speak, to have their say, their opinion, to offer their 1 pence piece. Job had 4 friends in total, 3 of whom speak in chapters 1 to chapter 31. But Job's 4th friend, Elihu, was the most patient. He listened for the longest. He doesn't speak his first word till chapter 32. Yet even he described the whole process of listening to Job as torture. Chapter 32. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job. Not Elihu had waited to listen to Job, but waited to speak to Job. Time spent listening for Elihu was merely time waiting to speak. He says in chapter 32, "For I am full of words, the spirit within me constrains me. Behold, my belly is like wine that has no vent, like the new wineskins ready to burst. I must speak, that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. I say, listen to me. Let me also declare my opinion. I also will answer with my share. I also will declare my opinion." Elihu was bursting at the seams to speak because, like us, every one of us has an opinion that we feel must be heard. And so Elihu says, "Pay attention, O Job, listen to me, be silent, and I will teach you wisdom." So often when someone expresses their feelings or explains their situation to us, we're not eager to listen, we're eager to speak, to share our opinion on something. We might have an opinion on how we would respond if we were in their situation. If I were you, I'd ... We might have an opinion on whether the person is reacting to their situation in the right way. You're overreacting, or stop being so negative. We might have an opinion on the steps they should have taken to avoid this happening. Now, if you'd remembered your parachute before you jumped out of the plane, we might have an opinion on a theological explanation for their situation. Ah, yes, but God has this purpose behind this. We might have an opinion on how closely their situation relates to ours. You know, I went through the same thing when my hamster died at the same age. Now, of course, there is a time and place for sharing experiences, for offering advice and giving gentle correction. But the primary purpose of listening is not to share our opinion. Unless the listener tells you otherwise, the primary purpose of listening is to listen. As Job says in chapter 6, "Have I said, make me a gift? Or from your wealth offer a bribe for me? Or deliver me from the adversary's hand? Or redeem me from the hand of the ruthless?" You know, Job wasn't primarily after somebody who could wave the magic wand and solve his situation with some sort of solution, including a single sentence bit of inspiration or a single sentence bit of advice. No, Job was primarily after somebody who would listen. As he says in chapter 13, "Worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent, and it would be your wisdom." You know, sadly, Job needed someone to listen to him. But Job's friends were more concerned with Job listening to them. In fact, they criticized Job for talking too much. They say in chapter 4, "If one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient?" In contrast, Job's main criticism of his friends was they kept cutting him off in order to speak. And so he says, "Keep listening to my words, and let this be your comfort." He wanted them to listen. They kept on speaking, and so he told them, "Please, just listen. Don't speak." The first way to be a bad listener is to be impatient. The second way to be a bad listener is to be inconsiderate. In one of his stand-up routines, the comedian Sean Locke made a case for swearing. You know, we often say swearing is inappropriate, but he said no, swearing is not inappropriate. This was one of his arguments. Is it appropriate to swear the first time you realize you're allergic to nuts? Now, regardless of your opinion on the appropriateness or inappropriateness of swearing, I hope you at least understand this. When you're going through something bad, you might say all kind of rash things. And what you need is not somebody jumping up on you and saying, "Now that was inappropriate." People need time and space to express themselves, even if that expression might seem inappropriate to us who are not in the same situation. As Job says in chapter 6, "Oh, that my vexation were weighed, and all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash." Job wants some people to understand the size, the weight of the things he is going through, so that they would understand why he was being a little rash in what he said. You know, sadly, it is common for the listener to feel that the person suffering is saying the wrong thing or expressing the wrong emotion. As Job says, in the thought of one who is at ease, there is contempt for misfortune. You know, when we're at ease, when we're not going through the same thing as somebody else, we tend to treat their misfortune as trivial, that they should have a handle on it, and they should certainly have a handle on how they express themselves. But because Job's friends had no understanding of what it was like to be in a difficult situation, because they had limited understanding, they showed very little understanding when Job's words were a little rash, a little inappropriate. Instead of giving Job the space to express himself, they were hard on him. They were quick to judge Job for responding in the wrong way. as Job accuses them in chapter 6, how forceful are upright words. Yes, there may have been some rightness to their words of correction, but however right they were, there was a right way, a right time, and a right amount to correct someone in their suffering when they're expressing their emotions in the wrong way. Some of the ways Job's friends criticized him include the following. Firstly, in chapter 18, verse 4, they say to Job, you who tear yourself in your anger. Job's friends deemed it inappropriate for Job to react this way, with sorrow, with anger, with frustration. After all, he'd only lost all he'd worked for, and all his children, and all respect of his wife in one single day. Job's friends sought even to place the blame for how Job was feeling on Job, rather on his situation. They even criticized Job for being overly negative. Are the comforts of God too small for you? They say in chapter 15. In chapter 14, Job had lamented the size of his suffering and said that the size of his suffering made it impossible for him to find joy in good things. In chapter 15, his friends told him he should be more appreciative of God's many blessings and less miserable about his few difficulties. It's like saying, at least your left leg isn't broken. I, as a nurse, know how easy it is to jump on people in distress and accuse them of expressing themselves in the wrong way. Often I meet patients who will say to me, I can't breathe. And nurses, like me, will nearly always respond, that's not true. You can breathe, otherwise you wouldn't be talking. What does nurses fail to realise is that person isn't making a statement of exact fact. They are making a statement of feeling. They feel like they can't breathe, they're suffocating, they need help. A statement of fact would be, I can't breathe, but my breathing is around 96.5% less than it normally is to the nearest heart percent. In situations of great difficulty, we need to give people time and space to express themselves in a not exactly factually accurate way. Maybe a not even correct way. You might find this if you read the book of Job. You might find yourself criticizing the way Job reacted. The severity of Job's suffering means he sometimes says things you might consider theologically incorrect, such as God is cruel, God is in the wrong, God has abandoned me. Now, in his heart of hearts, Job doesn't believe these things, but it doesn't stop him feeling them. That's why if you read Job in full, you'll find him expressing these feelings. God is cruel, God is in the wrong, God has abandoned me. And then a chapter later, you'll find him saying the exact opposite. And yet I know God is good. And yet I know God will answer me. And yet I know God is with me all of the time. What Job needed was not his friends jumping on his every theologically incorrect statement during his moments of weakness. No, what Job needed was someone to give him the time and space to express himself and how he was feeling at this time. So, be impatient, be inconsiderate, and be inexperienced, but say something anyway. It wasn't just that Job's friends didn't listen, it's that they didn't think they needed to listen. So we read in chapter 32 and 36 of Elihu, he says these things. I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. Therefore I say, listen to me. Let me also declare my opinion. I will answer with my share. I also will declare my opinion. Bear with me a little, and I will show you, for I have yet something to say on God's behalf. I will get my knowledge from afar, and ascribe righteousness to my Maker. For truly my words are not false. The one who is perfect in knowledge is with you. Elihu admits to being young in years, but he claimed to be an expert on the subject of suffering. Elihu recognized that what he was saying was only his humble opinion, but assumed that he and God were on the same page. What he was saying was perfect. We should listen to his words as if we were hearing from God himself. Elihu recognized his inexperience, and yet said something anyway. Of course, there is a time and place for saying something to someone who is suffering, but only after we have listened to them. As it says in the book of Proverbs, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Only after we've listened to those who suffer do we understand enough to be able to speak with any degree of insight. For they are the expert on their own suffering, not us. We can only offer the insight of an outsider who has tried their best to understand.